Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are delighted to share with you different stories of love and betrayal from around the world. So let's begin our story journey today. The crystal chandeliers in Taste and Truth restaurant illuminated the delicate porcelain and silver cutlery as Harlan carefully arranged this dinner to discuss the final details of the upcoming wedding. Lorelei seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, but Harlan attributed it to pre-wedding jitters. They had just ordered appetizers and Harlan was about to take out the wedding menu he had designed when the restaurant door was suddenly pushed open forcefully. A man strode in, dressed in a suit but with a grim expression, staring directly at their table. "Why wasn't I invited?" His voice echoed throughout the restaurant, causing all guests to turn around. Harlan looked surprised at this man, Griffin, their restaurant's main ingredient supplier. What shocked Harlan even more was Lorelei's reaction. She showed no surprise or confusion, but immediately stood up and said softly, "I'm sorry, I should have told you." Then, incredibly, she pulled out a chair for Griffin, indicating he should sit down, as if he were an expected member of this dinner. Harlan felt dizzy, as if struck by a heavy blow to his chest. The truth became painfully clear in that moment. The relationship between Lorelei and Griffin was far more than just business partners. Their exchange of glances, the slight trembling of Lorelei's hands, the natural way Griffin took the napkin she handed him. All these details silently revealed a truth that had been hidden from him. Harlan, containing his anger, slowly stood up with a voice surprisingly calm. "You two enjoy, because this wedding is off." The restaurant instantly fell silent. Dozens of eyes witnessed this public betrayal and breakup. Harlan looked at Lorelei one last time, her face showing a mixture of shock, guilt, and fear. Griffin appeared awkward and confused, his lips moving as if wanting to say something, but ultimately no sound came out. "Harlan, wait. I can explain." Lorelei finally found her voice, but Harlan had already turned to leave, leaving behind the commotion and whispers. The story of Harlan and Lorelei dates back 10 years, when they met at a famous culinary school in New York. Harlan was the most talented student at the school, standing out among his peers for his passion for food and pursuit of perfection. He not only mastered French cuisine, but also integrated Asian and South American elements to create unique flavors. Lorelei was known for her sharp business mind and organizational skills. While studying cooking, she also took business management courses. Together, they planned the school's graduation banquet, with Harlan in charge of menu design and kitchen management, while Lorelei handled the budget, marketing, and customer experience. The event was an unprecedented success, even attracting several Michelin-starred restaurant chefs to observe. This collaboration made them realize each other's value, and after graduating, they decided to start a business together. After 5 years of effort, their restaurant, Taste and Truth, became one of New York's most popular restaurants. Harlan was in charge of the kitchen, constantly innovating and changing the menu each season to maintain freshness and creativity. Lorelei managed the dining room and business relationships, ensuring the restaurant's efficient operation and excellent customer experience. She established a refined reservation system that maximized the restaurant's utilization while maintaining its uniqueness. They were perfect business partners and also an enviable couple. Outside of work, Harlan would prepare simple but elegant home-cooked dishes for Lorelei, and they would enjoy good food while discussing the day's events and future plans. Lorelei handled the practical matters of life, from budget management to vacation planning, allowing Harlan to focus on his creativity. Harlan proposed to Lorelei after the business stabilized, and she happily accepted. They planned to marry after the restaurant's 5th anniversary. Griffin entered their lives 2 years ago. As a supplier specializing in organic ingredients, he provided the restaurant with unique local ingredients, helping Harlan create several award-winning dishes. His company, Pure Source, though not large, had a good reputation in the high-end culinary circle, primarily serving independent restaurants that were extremely demanding about ingredient quality. Lorelei was responsible for communication and collaboration with suppliers, so her contact with Griffin was frequent. Initially, these contacts were purely professional: price negotiations, quality control, delivery scheduling. But as time passed, the situation began to change subtly. Lorelei had always hoped to expand the restaurant, open branches, or launch a high-end food line. She had grand business ambitions, hoping to turn the restaurant into a brand empire, perhaps someday competing with large restaurant groups. However, Harlan was more concerned with the restaurant's originality and food quality, fearing expansion would dilute their brand value and dish uniqueness. This became an increasingly frequent source of arguments between them. We should capitalize on our current popularity to expand, Lorelei insisted after a quarterly review meeting. Owners of 3 locations have contacted us hoping we'll open branches. The Upper West Side location is especially ideal, with high customer flow and rent more reasonable than our current location. Harlan shook his head, his fingers gently tapping the table. Our success is built on personal experience and unique dishes. If we open branches, who will guarantee the quality of each restaurant? I can't work in multiple kitchens at once. We can train other chefs, establish standard processes, Lorelei argued, opening her laptop to show a detailed expansion plan. That's how other restaurants do it. Look, I've already listed potential collaborating chefs, all talents you've praised at industry gatherings. We are not other restaurants, Harlan said firmly, gently closing her laptop. We are taste and truth. What we promise our customers is a unique experience, not mass-produced food. As the arguments increased, Lorelei began to feel her opinions were being ignored, that her business insight wasn't respected. She had put in just as much effort building this restaurant as Harlan, but felt her vision was limited by his artistic aspirations. Meanwhile, Griffin always seemed to understand her ideas, even offering viable expansion plans and potential supply chain solutions. Your ideas are very forward-thinking, Griffin agreed during a lunch meeting where they were discussing a seasonal vegetable supply contract, but the conversation naturally drifted toward the restaurant's future development. Expansion is a natural direction for development. Harlan should trust your business judgment more. In this competitive industry, standing still means falling behind. This acknowledgement made Lorelei feel understood and valued. At first, she only talked to Griffin about work, but gradually the topics expanded to personal life and future plans. Griffin was always a good listener, never rushed to make judgments, which contrasted sharply with Harlan's direct and decisive style. Harlan is a genius, but artists can sometimes be too stubborn, Lorelei sighed during a coffee date with Griffin. He doesn't understand that market opportunities are fleeting. Griffin nodded understandingly. Creative people need someone to help them navigate the business world. Your contribution is far more important than he realizes. Meanwhile, Harlan was busy preparing a special menu for Michelin reviewers, working increasingly longer hours. Although he tried to ensure at least 2 evenings a week with Lorelei, restaurant matters often interrupted their time together. Once, they planned a weekend getaway, but Harlan canceled at the last minute because he needed to test a new recipe for a key dish. Lorelei began to rely more on Griffin's companionship and emotional support. Their meetings moved from formal office environments to cafes, bars, and finally private dinners. Griffin always took Lorelei to places Harlan wouldn't go, trendy fusion restaurants, creative cocktail bars, allowing her to experience different culinary cultures. Griffin also had his own calculations. As a medium-sized supplier, obtaining an exclusive contract with a high-end restaurant like Taste and Truth would greatly enhance his company's reputation and income. Through his close relationship with Lorelei, he saw an opportunity to expand his business. Initially, he only wanted to use this relationship to gain business advantages, but over time, he genuinely became attracted to Lorelei's intelligence and charm. Their relationship began to deteriorate when Lorelei proposed reevaluating all supplier contracts. On the surface, this was to optimize costs, but in reality, she began providing more and more orders to Griffin, sometimes even excluding more competitive suppliers. Harlan noticed an increase in the cost of certain ingredients, but Lorelei explained this was due to market fluctuations, that instability in the organic ingredient market was normal. Harlan believed her explanation. After all, he trusted Lorelei's business decisions, while he focused primarily on creativity and cooking. However, months later, Harlan accidentally discovered anomalies in the restaurant's accounts. He was preparing a cost control plan, hoping to increase profit margins without sacrificing quality, so he could invest more in staff training and equipment upgrades. While reviewing financial documents, he noticed that the amounts paid to Pure Source were far higher than to other suppliers and increasing month by month, far exceeding normal seasonal fluctuations. Stranger still, these additional expenses weren't reflected in ingredient quality. In fact, Harlan had recently questioned the freshness of some ingredients. Out of curiosity and concern, Harlan began investigating further. He compared price lists from different suppliers and discovered that Griffin's company charged significantly above market price for many items. He also checked Lorelei's email records and meeting schedules, discovering that her contact with Griffin was much more frequent than necessary for business, sometimes meeting 3 or 4 times a week, many in the evenings or on weekends. Most shocking to Harlan was discovering that Lorelei had a separate email address, used exclusively for communication with Griffin. As a co-owner of the restaurant, Harlan had access to all business-related communication systems. When he tried to log into this email with Lorelei's password, the system showed the password was incorrect, which deepened his suspicions. With the help of a technician, Harlan finally accessed this email and found hundreds of messages, evolving from business discussions to expressions of personal feelings. The earliest emails maintained a professional tone, but over time, their communication became increasingly personal. The most recent emails even discussed how they might jointly operate a new restaurant without Harlan's knowledge. Lorelei would provide management and branding. Griffin would handle the supply chain and part of the financing. "I found the perfect location," Lorelei wrote in one email. "Right in an emerging area of Brooklyn, trendy enough, but with rents that haven't skyrocketed yet. We can create a concept completely different from Taste and Truth, so Harlan won't feel we're copying his creativity." Griffin's reply was more direct. "Why still consider his feelings? If he doesn't want to participate in expansion, let him stick with his single restaurant. You deserve a broader stage." Harlan felt nauseated, not just from Lorelei's betrayal, but because they were planning to steal his business model and compete with him. Worse still, Lorelei seemed to be starting to transfer restaurant resources and customer information to prepare for their new venture. Harlan decided to give Lorelei one last chance. He arranged a formal dinner, planning to ask her directly about these discoveries. He deliberately chose the restaurant where they first met, hoping to evoke memories of their beginnings. That's why Griffin's sudden appearance was so dramatic. He mistakenly believed Lorelei had already told Harlan about their relationship, and that this dinner was to discuss future arrangements among the three of them. When Harlan walked out of the restaurant, New York's night wind was cutting, but he could barely feel the cold. 10 years of love and trust collapsed in an instant, leaving only the pain of betrayal and confusion about the future. He walked aimlessly down the street, his phone constantly vibrating in his pocket, showing Lorelei's calls, but he didn't answer any. After hours of walking alone, Harlan's thoughts began to clear. He knew he needed to take action, and quickly, not just to protect his heart, but also the restaurant empire he had created with his own hands. He couldn't allow Lorelei and Griffin to use his success and reputation to realize their plans. Harlan went directly to the restaurant, near midnight, but he knew that senior staff usually stayed after closing to prepare for the next day's work. Indeed, sous chef Emmett and several core team members were still there, discussing the next day's special menu. Seeing Harlan's serious expression, everyone stopped what they were doing. Harlan gathered all the senior staff present, including the sous chef and financial manager, and explained the situation briefly and concisely. No emotional outbursts, just facts and a plan of action going forward. As of tonight, Lorelei is no longer the restaurant's manager or partner. Her access card has been deactivated, and all passwords will be changed within an hour. Tomorrow morning, my lawyer will contact her to discuss terminating the partnership. Harlan's voice was steady and determined, leaving no room for discussion. Team members exchanged looks of surprise, but no one objected. Harlan had always been a fair and respectful boss. They trusted his judgment. Sous chef Emmett, Harlan's friend of many years, stayed after the meeting. "Are you okay?" Emmett asked with concern. He had known Harlan for over 10 years and had never seen him handle a crisis so calmly. Harlan shook his head. "No, but I will be. Now, we need to review all contracts with Griffin's company and cancel all orders starting tomorrow. Do we have enough inventory?" Emmett asked, somewhat worried, knowing certain specialty ingredients were exclusively supplied by Griffin. "I've already contacted several alternative suppliers. They'll send samples tomorrow," Harlan replied. evidently having considered everything carefully. Quality is our primary concern, but I definitely won't do business with Griffin again. Also, I need you to temporarily take over some of Lorelai's responsibilities until we find a new manager. Emmett nodded. Of course, we'll get through this together. You know the entire team is on your side. Harlan gave a grateful pat on his friend's shoulder, the first show of emotion that night. Thank you. I know I'm not alone. The next morning, Lorelai tried to enter the restaurant, but her access card was rejected. The security guard politely but firmly informed her that he had received instructions not to let her in. When she called Harlan, she only received a brief text message. Please contact my lawyer. All communication will be through him. Your personal belongings will be sent to the address you specify. Lorelai, standing outside the restaurant, suddenly realized she had lost not only her fiancé, but also the business she had helped build. 10 years of effort, countless ideas and hard work, all vanished because of her betrayal. She dialed Griffin's number, her voice trembling. I need to see you. Everything's over. Harlan knows everything. Griffin sounded equally shocked. How did he find out? You said he didn't care about details. Obviously, I was wrong, Lorelai replied bitterly. He's much more attentive than I imagined. What do we do now? We continue with the original plan. Griffin quickly calmed down. This might be a good thing. Now we can fully commit to our project without worrying about Harlan's feelings. Lorelai hesitated silently for a moment. I don't know, Griffin. Everything is happening too fast. I need time to think. Meanwhile, Harlan began systematically removing Lorelai from the restaurant's operations. The legal procedures were more complicated than expected, as Lorelai effectively owned 20% of the restaurant's shares. Harlan offered to buy her shares at a price above market value, on the condition that the transaction be completed immediately and she signed confidentiality and non-compete agreements. Lorelai initially refused, hoping to maintain her position in the restaurant. This is my effort too, she expressed through her lawyer. I have the right to continue participating in its management. You can't deny my contribution to the restaurant for personal reasons. Harlan's response was to increase the offer and add conditions. Accept this proposal, or I will push for complete dissolution of the partnership to reorganize the company. Given the current situation, including evidence of your breach of fiduciary duty, any court would support my decision, and a lengthy legal process benefits no one. Lorelai's lawyer privately told her that the evidence Harlan had was indeed sufficient to disadvantage her in court, especially those emails showing how she used restaurant resources for personal gain. More importantly, a public legal battle would completely destroy her reputation in the culinary world. Faced with Harlan's determination and generous compensation, Lorelai finally accepted the conditions. After signing the agreement, Harlan felt a sense of relief, but also deep sadness. This marked the definitive end of their relationship. Years of memories, shared dreams, all the good times, now overshadowed by betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Harlan took a series of actions. He not only terminated all contracts with Griffin's company, but also, through industry contacts and private conversations, in a discreet but effective manner, let other restaurant owners and chefs know about Griffin's unprofessional behavior. He didn't explicitly mention the personal relationship, only implied that Griffin had used improper means to influence purchasing decisions, resulting in inflated prices and quality issues. I'm just suggesting everyone be especially careful when working with suppliers, Harlan said at a Chefs Association gathering. Recently, I discovered certain suppliers use personal relationships to influence business decisions, ultimately leading restaurants to pay above-market prices. This careful handling avoided potential defamation issues, but the effect was equally significant. In the tight-knit circle of high-end dining, reputation and trust are crucial. Within a few months, Griffin's company lost most of its high-end clients, forcing him to turn toward the lower-profit mass market. Meanwhile, Harlan transformed his personal emotions into creative inspiration. He immersed himself in work, designing a series of new dishes that reflected his new understanding of life and relationships. Most notable was a new signature dish called Truth, a sauce that appeared perfectly uniform on the surface, but contained multiple layers of completely different flavors that gradually revealed themselves when the customer cut into it. The preparation of this dish was extremely complex, requiring precise temperature control and timing. The sauce's top layer had a creamy texture. Underneath was a fruit layer with subtle acidity, then an intense red wine reduction, and at the bottom an essence of bone broth with spicy and complex aromas. Each layer existed independently, not mixing, yet forming a harmonious whole when tasted. This dish quickly became the restaurant's most popular item, generating extensive discussion among food critics. The New York Times food column even dedicated an entire page to analyzing the meaning and technical innovation of this dish. A famous critic wrote, "Truth is not just a culinary masterpiece, but also an emotional experience. It reminds us that beneath surface harmony may hide complex realities, and only by facing them bravely can we discover the true flavor." Harlan has infused this dish with his deep reflections on human nature and relationships, making us marvel at how food can be so philosophical. This review generated speculation about Harlan's personal life, but he refused to discuss it in any interview. Reporters tried to uncover details of his breakup with Lorelai, but all were politely rebuffed. His silence deepened public curiosity, inadvertently bringing more attention and reservations to the restaurant. Lorelai and Griffin's plans began to encounter obstacles. After losing the Taste and Truth contract, Griffin's company's cash flow drastically decreased, and with the loss of other high-end clients, he didn't have enough funds to invest in the new restaurant. Lorelai tried to find other investors, but Harlan's influence in the industry made many potential investors cautious about working with her. More problematic, their relationship began showing cracks after losing their common interest base. Without her position as restaurant manager, Lorelai's business value to Griffin greatly diminished. And as Griffin's business declined, his patience and charm also gradually disappeared, replaced by reproaches and emotional reactions toward Lorelai. "If you had handled it properly, things wouldn't have ended like this," Griffin accused during a meeting about the new restaurant planning. "You should have been more careful, more strategic." How did Harlan discover those emails? "Didn't you say he knew nothing about computers?" "Are you blaming me?" Lorelai asked incredulously. "You're the one who burst into the restaurant, exposing our relationship in front of everyone. If you had waited for me to talk clearly with Harlan, I thought you had already told him." Griffin argued heatedly. "You said you were going to reevaluate your relationship, have a serious conversation. I thought that dinner was to discuss future arrangements. Were you just planning to keep postponing this?" This argument was just one of their growing confrontations. Over time, both began to realize that, apart from their common greed for Harlan's restaurant, they barely had any connection points. Lorelai had been attracted to Griffin's business mindset and his appreciation for her ideas, while Griffin valued Lorelai's contacts and experience in high-end dining. When these external factors disappeared, their relationship cooled rapidly. Nevertheless, they still tried to advance the new restaurant plan, partly to prove themselves, partly because they had already invested time and energy. At a moment when an investor was about to sign, an unexpected event occurred. The investor's daughter was a regular customer of Taste and Truth, recognized Lorelai, and told her father about Lorelai's breakup with Harlan and its causes. The investor immediately withdrew his intention to collaborate. "I cannot partner with someone who betrays a business partner," he told Griffin frankly. "If she can betray someone she worked with for 10 years, she can betray us too." This failure marked a turning point in their relationship. Griffin began to distance himself more from Lorelai. Meetings became brief and purely commercial. The intimacy between them gradually disappeared. Lorelai tried to salvage the situation, but Griffin had already begun looking for new partners. The restaurant industry is a small circle. News spreads quickly. Although Harlan never publicly discussed his breakup with Lorelai, people soon pieced together the clues and formed their own conclusions. Lorelai quickly discovered she faced obstacles everywhere when looking for a new job. Nobody openly mentioned her breakup with Harlan, but everyone seemed to know the details. "We currently don't have suitable positions," politely rejected her application the HR director of a known restaurant group, despite their website clearly listing a vacancy for senior manager. Another restaurant owner was more direct. "Your resume is impressive, but we value team loyalty and professional ethics more." After several consecutive rejections, Lorelai realized that Harlan's influence in the industry was much greater than she had imagined. Although he didn't directly attack her, his silence and discretion had a more lasting impact. Finally, She had to accept a position as assistant manager at an ordinary chain restaurant, with a salary and status far inferior to her previous one. This is just temporary, Lorelei told herself. When the storm passes, I'll rise again. But deep down she knew that, in this industry that values relationships and trust, some stains may never be cleansed. Griffin's situation was worse. His company began losing money after losing high-end clients, forcing him to lay off staff and reduce operations. He tried to keep remaining clients by lowering prices, but this further reduced profit margins. He contacted several venture capital firms hoping to obtain financing for a transformation, but all politely declined due to recent performance declines and poor market evaluations. The market isn't suitable for food supplier expansion, diplomatically said an investment advisor, especially for those who have lost key clients. Finally, Griffin was forced to sell his company to a larger competitor at a price far below his expectations. As part of the deal, he was hired as a regional sales manager, effectively demoted, no longer having decision-making power or autonomy. His office moved from central Manhattan to a warehouse in the Bronx, and his work changed from discussing unique ingredients with Michelin-starred chefs to selling standardized products to restaurant chains. Harlan's restaurant, meanwhile, enjoyed unprecedented success. After losing Lorelei, he not only didn't reduce his workload, but personally took over many responsibilities previously delegated to her. He began arriving at the restaurant 2 hours earlier each day, communicating individually with staff, understanding their ideas and suggestions. He discovered that, through direct communication, he could gain more innovative inspiration while strengthening team cohesion. Harlan recruited a talented new manager, Thea, who had worked at several Michelin-starred restaurants in Europe, bringing new management concepts and customer experience design. Under Harlan's guidance, Thea established a more transparent and fair management system, improving the restaurant's work atmosphere. Employee satisfaction increased, turnover declined, and service quality naturally improved. 6 months later, the restaurant earned the coveted Michelin star, with judges especially praising the originality and philosophy of the truth dish. The waiting time for reservations extended from 2 weeks to 3 months. Social media filled with praise and recommendations from customers. Photos of the truth dish on Instagram received hundreds of thousands of likes. Harlan's success story was reported by several culinary magazines. Food and Wine even named him Chef of the Year. The media praised him not just as an exceptional chef, but also as a visionary entrepreneur, able to achieve commercial success while maintaining originality. However, in private, Harlan was still dealing with the emotional trauma of betrayal. Despite achieving unprecedented professional success, his personal life remained empty. He rarely dated, dedicating almost all his time to work. Emmett and other friends began to worry about his health and psychological state. At Emmett's insistence, Harlan began attending a support group for people who had experienced betrayal. Initially, he felt uncomfortable sharing his experiences, but soon discovered that listening to others' stories and sharing his feelings had a healing effect. The most painful part isn't losing her, Harlan confessed at a group meeting, his voice low but firm. It's realizing that everything I believed in was built on lies. The future we planned together, the business we built, even our daily conversations. Now, looking back, they make me doubt their authenticity. I don't know what was real and what was just an act for her own ends. Other group members nodded understandingly, many sharing similar experiences and feelings. The group facilitator encouraged Harlan to focus on his own growth and future, not to immerse himself in past pain. Betrayal certainly destroys the past, but it shouldn't destroy your future, the facilitator said gently. You've already proven yourself in the professional realm. Now it's time to do the same on a personal level. Harlan began trying new interests, making new friends, gradually rebuilding his life. He participated in a culinary education program, dedicating 1 day a month to teaching children in public schools basic cooking techniques and food knowledge. These activities allowed him to rediscover his original love for cooking, the joy of sharing food, and the pleasure of creating. He no longer avoided mentioning Lorelei, but when he spoke of her, the pain in his tone had been replaced by acceptance and understanding. It was a chapter in my life that's now finished, he told Emmett. I learned valuable lessons, though the price was high. A year later, at a national culinary industry conference, Harlan encountered Lorelei again. She was representing the chain restaurant where she now worked, standing at a modest booth distributing brochures. She looked much thinner, with a look of weariness and regret in her eyes. They looked at each other for a second in the crowd. Harlan felt a rush of complex emotions: anger, sadness, compassion, even a hint of nostalgia, but no forgiveness. He nodded politely in acknowledgement, then turned to immerse himself in conversations with other chefs. In that moment, Lorelei understood what she had lost forever: not just a relationship, but a shared dream and a trustworthy partner. Lorelei tried to rebuild her professional career through hard work, but her reputation had already spread throughout the industry. She was no longer viewed as a trustworthy professional, but as someone who would betray a partner for personal gain. Former industry friends began to distance themselves. Invitations to events decreased. "We were friends," said the owner of a winery that had collaborated with Taste and Truth when rejecting a collaboration proposal from Lorelei. "But everyone in the industry knows what you did to Harlan. I can't risk working with you. I'm sorry." More ironically, Griffin completely cut contact with her. After their new restaurant plan completely failed, Griffin seemed to quickly shift his attention. When Lorelei tried to contact him seeking help during financial difficulties, Griffin directly rejected her. "We no longer have common interests," he coldly replied to her message. "And frankly, your judgment worries me. If you had handled your relationship with Harlan better, our current situation would be completely different." Lorelei was surprised by Griffin's coldness. "You were involved too, Griffin. We made these decisions together. The decisions may have been joint, but the execution was your responsibility," Griffin retorted. "You knew Harlan. You should have known how to avoid being discovered, or at least how to end your relationship more elegantly. Now we both pay the price, but I'm ready to move on. I suggest you do the same." This conversation pierced Lorelei's heart like a knife. She finally understood that Griffin had never really cared about her, only seeing her as a tool to achieve his ambitions. When the tool lost its usefulness, it was mercilessly discarded. Looking back, all the signs had been there. He always talked about the value of Taste and Truth and Harlan's reputation, rarely about her value as an individual. And she, absorbed in the feeling of being valued, selectively ignored these warning signs. Harlan's success at the restaurant continued to grow. In 2 years, he expanded his business, but not simply by opening branches. He founded a culinary school, focused on sustainable and ethical cooking practices. He also established a farm-to-table project, forming direct collaborations with local farmers, ensuring the quality and sustainability of ingredients. These initiatives reflected both his pure love for gastronomy and created additional income sources and brand value for the restaurant. Interestingly, Harlan finally began considering restaurant expansion, but in a completely different way than Lorelei had imagined. He chose to collaborate with other talented chefs, each maintaining their creative autonomy, sharing resources and knowledge, rather than simply replicating the existing model. This chef alliance model caused a sensation in the industry, seen as an innovative model for high-end dining, maintaining the uniqueness of each restaurant while achieving economies of scale and brand synergies. "This isn't expansion, it's joint growth," Harlan explained at a chef summit. "Each chef maintains their own style and creativity. What we share are values and commitment to excellence." Lorelei occasionally heard news of Harlan's success, each time with complex emotions. She was happy for him, but also regretted her own choices. She had had the opportunity to be part of all this, but she chose betrayal instead of communication and compromise. What pained her most was that Harlan eventually did achieve expansion, just in a more innovative and meaningful way than she had imagined. 3 years later, Lorelei finally gathered the courage to attend a public cooking demonstration by Harlan. It was an event to raise funds for his culinary school, open to the public. She stood at the back of the crowd, watching Harlan confidently showcase his latest creations, interact with the audience, share his culinary philosophy. He looked happy and fulfilled, completely different from the stubborn perfectionist she remembered. His passion when talking about food and attention to detail were still there, but he was now more relaxed, more willing to share knowledge, even showing understanding and patience with students' mistakes. Lorelei realized that losing her might have actually helped Harlan grow into a better person and a more well-rounded chef. After the demonstration, as the crowd began to disperse, Lorelei took a deep breath and approached Harlan. He was packing up his equipment, not noticing her approach. When he looked up and saw Lorelei standing there, his expression became complex, but he maintained professional courtesy. "Your demonstration was brilliant," Lorelei said softly, feeling a tremor in her voice. "I'm really glad to see you've had such success." Harlan nodded, his gaze calm and distant. "Thank you." His response was brief but polite, without any warmth, as if addressing an unknown spectator. "I wanted to say," Lorelei began, but Harlan gently shook his head, interrupting her. "There's no need, Lorelei," he said quietly. "What's past is past. I hope you're doing well, but we have nothing to say to each other." He continued gathering his knives and notes, clearly indicating the conversation was over. Lorelei nodded understandingly, tears in her eyes. She knew Harlan had let go of his resentment toward her. He was no longer trapped by anger and pain, but this didn't mean forgiveness or the possibility of rebuilding a relationship. Some wounds can never fully heal. Some trust once broken can never be restored. "Good luck, Harlan," she finally said, before turning to leave. Harlan watched her retreating figure without responding. His expression revealed no emotion, just a quiet certainty. He had completely recovered from her betrayal. His life and career had moved beyond the shadows of the past, and she could no longer occupy a place in them. Lorelei left the venue into the New York night. She had fantasized about how this meeting would unfold, perhaps an emotional confrontation or a touching reconciliation, even Harlan showing a hint of nostalgia or regret. But the reality was that Harlan had placed her completely outside his life. She was no longer important to him, not worth emotional investment, not even anger. This quiet rejection hurt more than any intense reaction. Griffin's life trajectory took an even darker turn. After his company was acquired, he attempted several business ventures, but all ended in failure. People in the industry remembered his unpleasant ending with taste and truth. No one was willing to establish long-term cooperation with him. Investors were skeptical of his business plans. Suppliers demanded advance payments. Potential clients were wary of his promises. Griffin finally left New York, moving to the West Coast, hoping to start anew in a fresh market. But in the internet age, information travels faster than he imagined. His reputation always seemed to arrive before him. After several failures, he finally abandoned the food industry, switching to the completely unrelated field of real estate to start over. Harlan never sought to deliberately take revenge on Lorelei or Griffin, but his decisive actions and professional handling produced the most powerful consequences. His principle of not collaborating with unethical people, coupled with his growing influence in the industry, had a more lasting impact on Lorelei and Griffin than any direct revenge. 5 years later, Harlan's restaurant had gained international recognition, and he himself had become an authority in the culinary world, frequently invited to speak at food festivals and chef summits around the world. In a television interview, a reporter cautiously mentioned past events, asking if he would be willing to talk about how that experience had affected him. Harlan reflected for a moment and replied, "Every experience, however painful, can teach us something valuable. That period helped me better understand the importance of trust, both in personal relationships and business collaborations. It also helped me realize that sometimes, what seems like an obstacle is actually a force that drives us forward." The reporter asked if there were any regrets or unfulfilled wishes. Harlan shook his head. "I've archived that experience. My restaurant, my students, my community projects, these are my focus now." After this interview aired, Lorelei happened to see it on television. She had left New York and opened a small cafe in Chicago. Much smaller in scale than the empire she once dreamed of, but at least it was honest and independent. Watching Harlan so confident and serene on camera, she felt a mix of complex emotions. Time had softened the pain of betrayal and failure, but regret and thoughts of what if occasionally still arose. Lorelei's cafe business was stable but unremarkable. She had established some reputation in the community, but could never again approach the inner circle of high-end dining. She tried several romantic relationships, but all failed due to her fear of intimacy and trust issues. The experience of betraying Harlan not only ruined her professional career, but also affected her personal life. Griffin completely disappeared from the culinary world's radar. He achieved some success in the Los Angeles real estate market, but far from his glory days in the food supply industry. Occasionally, he would remember his history with Lorelai and Harlan, but quickly suppressed these memories. It was a wrong decision in his career, a judgment error that could never be rectified. Harlan's life continued to evolve. His restaurant empire steadily expanded. His culinary school trained generations of talented chefs, some of whom even became part of his chef alliance. He began selectively accepting invitations to culinary programs, not to seek fame, but to share his passion for food and ideas about sustainable cooking. Although Harlan occasionally dated, he never again became seriously involved in a relationship. The shadow of betrayal was always present, keeping him at a certain distance in intimate relationships. However, this didn't affect his quality of life. He had a fulfilling career, a close circle of friends, and an eternal love for gastronomy. Harlan never completely healed the scars in his heart, but he learned to live with them. He channeled his energy into his career and community building, creating a program to help aspiring young chefs avoid common business pitfalls, including how to establish healthy collaborative relationships and protect their creative property rights. His life was fulfilling and meaningful. Without need for deliberate revenge, he had already proven his worth. Harlan's story circulated widely in the culinary industry, becoming a model of how integrity and professionalism ultimately are rewarded. Meanwhile, Lorelai and Griffin's experiences became a silent warning. Betrayal may bring short-term benefits, but the long-term cost often exceeds expectations. In this industry built on relationships and reputation, lost trust can almost never be rebuilt, and the shadow of betrayal may follow you for life. 6 years later, on a spring afternoon, Harlan was sitting on the terrace of his high-rise apartment in Brooklyn, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He was reviewing the final proofs of his third cookbook with a glass of aged red wine beside him. This book no longer focused just on cooking techniques, but explored more deeply the relationship between food and life philosophy. The phone sound interrupted the tranquility. It was his assistant, Gemma. "Harlan, sorry to disturb you." Gemma's voice sounded somewhat hesitant. "There's news I think you should know. Lorelai passed away last night from a heart attack. She was in her cafe in Chicago, with only a few customers present." Harlan was silent for a moment, feeling a mix of complex emotions. Not sadness, nor the satisfaction of revenge fulfilled, but a sense of emptiness difficult to name. Once, this woman had been the most important part of his life. Now, her death was simply news he should know. "Thank you for telling me," he finally said, his voice calm. "Are there arrangements for the funeral?" "It will be in Chicago. Her sister is handling it." She didn't leave much. The cafe was already in debt. Harlan thought for a moment. "Please arrange an anonymous donation, enough to cover funeral expenses and clear the debts." This wasn't forgiveness, just a final respect to someone with whom he had shared 10 years of his life. He wouldn't attend the funeral, wouldn't mourn her publicly, but he couldn't remain completely indifferent either. After hanging up, Harlan gazed at the distant lights. Lorelai's death made him realize he had truly moved past the past. The anger, betrayal, and pain of those years no longer dominated his emotional world. They had become part of his character, a chapter of his experience, but no longer defined who he was. That same night, in Los Angeles, Griffin was attending a celebration for a real estate development project. When his phone vibrated showing a message from a former colleague informing him of Lorelai's death, he put down his wine glass in surprise. Though they hadn't been in contact for years, the news shook him. With the excuse of going to the bathroom, he stood before the mirror pondering. Lorelai's image appeared in his mind, not the woman who finally blamed him with disappointment, but the early restaurant manager full of passion and ideas. He remembered the sparkle in her eyes when talking about expansion plans, the birthday gifts she carefully chose to please Harlan, even her initial hesitation about betrayal. Griffin had to admit that Lorelai's death led him to reconsider his own choices and actions. He had taken advantage of her professional frustration and personal dissatisfaction, guiding her toward betrayal, and then quickly cut ties when things were discovered, placing all responsibility on her. He had never really taken responsibility for his actions, not even seriously considered his role in the whole affair. When he returned to the table, He couldn't reintegrate into the festive atmosphere. Discussions about real estate transactions, profit margins, and investment returns suddenly seemed so empty. He left the party early, driving aimlessly along the coast, reflecting on life's brevity and the weight of choices. Meanwhile, Harlan decided to go for a walk. New York's night was full of life, the streets bustling with people. He walked several blocks and arrived in front of a small art gallery. Through the window, he saw an abstract painting hanging on the wall, an apparently calm body of water hiding complex currents and colors beneath. This painting reminded him of his truth dish. The gallery was hosting an opening reception. Harlan entered and was recognized by a young curator. She enthusiastically introduced him to the artists and works, without mentioning his fame or background. This pure artistic exchange provided him with a sense of lightness long forgotten. "What do you think of this piece?" asked Zara, the curator, pointing to the abstract painting that had attracted his attention. "It makes me think of life's complexity," Harlan replied. "How many invisible emotions and stories hide beneath the superficial calm?" Zara nodded, smiling. "The artist says this painting is about layers of reality. I think that's very close to your interpretation." They continued discussing the similarities between art and cooking, how to express emotions and tell stories through different media. The conversation naturally extended to a small nearby cafe, and Harlan found himself sharing some personal stories, including how he began his culinary career. "I've heard your story," Zara said quietly later, with a sincere look, "about your former partner. I just want to say you handled it with great elegance." Harlan looked at her. "How do you know?" "The art world and the restaurant world have many intersections," she explained. "And I used to work at a PR firm, handling some similar crises. Most people choose public confrontations or revenge, but you chose silence and focusing on your own career. That's admirable." This simple acknowledgement touched something within Harlan, realizing it might be the first time someone truly understood and affirmed the value of his way of handling betrayal. Not because of the results, his success, and their failure, but because of the character shown in the process. They exchanged contact information, agreeing to visit a new art installation together the following week. As Harlan walked back home, he felt something inside him loosening. He wasn't sure if this would develop into a new relationship, but he was willing to keep an open mind. The next morning, the first thing Harlan did upon waking was call his lawyer to confirm the anonymous donation was arranged. Then, he opened his computer and began writing a short text about Lorelei. Not an obituary, nor a revelation, just an objective record of a relationship, a simple summary of 10 years of joint entrepreneurship. He didn't plan to publish it. It was just for himself, to finally accept that the past really existed and had truly become history. After finishing, Harlan closed his computer, put on his chef's uniform, and headed to his flagship restaurant. Today, he would create a completely new dish, no longer about truth or betrayal, but about letting go and rebirth. He was ready to welcome the next chapter of his life, whatever it might bring. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. See you in our next story.